Hello everybody. So today we are going to be solving complex quadratics. But first let's take a look at this do now. It says to factor. So the first one we have to factor is 9x squared minus 100. Okay, so when we do this, we have to figure out which factoring method is best. First, you should always check for GCF, but we don't have a GCF here. We have two terms, and we have a subtraction sign in the middle. When we have that, the method that we have to use is DOPS. So to use DOPS, you set up two sets of parentheses. You have a plus in one and a minus in the other. To figure out what goes inside, you have to take the square root of both terms. So the square root of 9x squared is 3x. So that goes in the front of both parentheses. Then we also have to take the square root of 100, which is 10, and 10 goes at the end of the parentheses. And this is done. Next we have x squared minus 16x plus 64. So for this problem, we have three terms and we have no number in front of the x squared, which means we are using trinomial. So to use the trinomial method, you have to set up your two sets of parentheses. You have to put an x in the front of both, and then you figure out what signs go inside them. So first, the minus goes in the first one, because we bring that down. And then we have to combine the minus and the plus. So two negatives together, a positive and a negative make a negative. So negative times positive is a negative. Now to find the numbers that go in there, we have to find the factors of 64. There is a way to do this in your calculator. So in your calculator, what you can do is go to y equals, do 64 divided by x, and then look at the table. All of your whole number pairings are your factors. So we have 1 and 64. We have 2 and 32. We have 4 and 16. And we also have 8 and 8. So we found all of our factors of 64, but we need to see which one of these will either add or subtract to 16. And the only ones that happens for is 8 and 8. So the two numbers that go in here are our 8s. And that is our factored answer. Now there actually is another way to write this. Since both parentheses are exactly the same, we can write our answer as x minus 8 squared. So that's how that would be done. Okay, so a quadratic equation is an equation that contains x squared. That's super important because you need to know when to identify this. Methods for solving quadratics: you can use factoring, you can use square rooting, you can use quadratic formula, or completing the square. Okay? Now, factoring may be easier, but quadratic formula will always work, which is why we stress the quadratic formula. So let's look at this first one. So when you have something that doesn't exactly look like a quadratic, but it looks like you can simplify, let's try to simplify first. So we're going to simplify both sides of this equation. So we have negative 3, then we have x minus 4 squared plus 12 equals 10. Now there's going to be many different ways to solve this, so if you solve it a different way than I do, that is totally okay. So first we have our exponents. We have that x minus 4 squared. So let's try to deal with that. So we have to do x minus 4 times x minus 4. When we do this, we have x times x, which is x squared, x times negative 4, negative 4x, then another, negative 4x, negative 4 times negative 4 is a positive 16. We can combine our like terms here, which will then give us x squared minus 8x plus 16. Now we can't forget everything from the start. So we have that negative 3 in the front. We need the parentheses around what we just find because that negative 3 has to be multiplied to everything there. So let's distribute that negative 3. When we distribute the negative 3, we get negative 3x squared plus 24x plus negative 3 times 16, negative 3 times 16, that gives us a negative 48. So this should be a minus 48. Then we have the plus 12, and we have the equal to 10. So now we have to combine like terms again, negative 48 and a positive 12. So this gives us negative 3x squared plus 24x minus 36 equals 10. So now it's very clear that we have a quadratic because we have that x squared there. Now, when you have a quadratic, in order to solve, you have to have everything on one side. That means it has to be equal to 0. To get this equal to 0, we have to subtract the 10 on both sides. And we get negative 3x squared plus 24x minus 46 equals 0. Now you can try whichever method you like. However, since the quadratic formula works all the time, we are going to use the quadratic formula. If you want to try another method, go for it and then compare your answers to what we get. So for the quadratic formula, we are going to need to identify A, B, and C. A, B, C. So A is negative 3. It's the number in front of x squared. B is a positive 24. And C is a negative 46. So we have to plug this into the quadratic formula. So let's bring the work all the way up here. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root, b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Keep in mind that is given to you. You don't have to memorize that formula. So when we plug everything in, we get x equals negative, b was 24, plus or minus the square root. Again, b was 24. A was negative 3. And c was negative 46. And that is all over 2 times negative 3. So when we use the quadratic formula, we want 3 numbers. The number under the radical, the number in the denominator, and the number in the numerator. So here, negative 24, that goes before the plus or minus. Let me just fix that a little bit so it's more clear. Negative 24. In the denominator, 2 times negative 3, that's negative 6. And to find the number that goes underneath, we use our calculator. We do not type the radical in our calculator during this step. So we have 24 squared minus 4 times negative 3 times negative 46. And we get 24. So 24 goes under the radical. We want to see if we can simplify radical 24. Let's see if it's a perfect square. So it's not a perfect square, so we need to find the biggest perfect square that goes into 24. A little reminder, our perfect squares are 1 times 1 gives us 1, 2 times 2, 3 times 3, 4 times 4, 5 times 5, 6 times 6, and so on. I'm not going to list them all. But let's try to simplify radical 24 using a perfect square. So let's do 24 divided by 16 to start. Does not divide evenly. Let's do 24 divided by 9. Doesn't divide evenly. 24 divided by 4. And that does divide evenly. So this splits up into radical 4 times radical 6. The square root of 4 is 2. So this becomes 2 the square root of 6. So we're going to replace radical 24 with now 2 radical 6. And that is all divided by negative 6. You may see your answer like this, or you may see your answer simplified a little bit more. What we can do is divide that negative 6 by both terms. So negative 24 divided by negative 6. Then you have plus or minus 2 radical 6 divided by negative 6. Now, when you do this, negative 24 divided by negative 6 gives us 4. Then we have plus or minus. Now we have 2 divided by negative 6. So 2 divided by negative 6. That gives us a decimal, or we could change that into a fraction, and it simplifies to negative 1/3. So we have negative 1 radical 6 over 3. And this here would be our simplified answer. Keep in mind, you don't necessarily need this 1 in there. You can just have a negative radical 6. Both answers would be perfectly fine. All right, let's see another one here. Here we have 54 equals x times x minus 3. So again, we have to first simplify what we have here. We can distribute that x to the x minus 3. So let's start by doing that. So distribute that x. When we distribute the x, we get x squared minus 3x, and that's equal to 54. Now let's see. We have a quadratic. We have to get everything over to one side. So we have to subtract the 54 on both sides. So we get x squared minus 3x minus 54. Now we can do one of two things. We can go straight into the quadratic formula, or we can test to see if we can factor this. So let's just see if we can factor it. If we do factor, we have 3 terms, and we have no number in front of the x squared. That means we would be using trinomial. If we use trinomial, we would need to find 2 numbers that multiply to 54 and add or subtract to 3. So let's see if that's possible. So we can go to our calculator, go to y equals. we could do 54 divided by x, and let's look at the factors. So our factors are 1 and 54. The next one is 2 and 27. Then we have 3 and 18. Then we have 6 and 9. And that looks like those are all of our factors. So we have to see if any of these factors will add or subtract to 3. And if you look at it, 6 and 9 will subtract to 3. So this means that factoring will work and we can use it for this. So we do have to use trinomial. So for trinomial, we have 2 sets of parentheses. We have an x in both of them. Now we have to figure out what signs go in them. The first sign goes in the first parenthesis, and then a combination of both signs go in the second. 2 negatives give us a positive. Now we already found our numbers. Our numbers are 6 and 9. Since 9 is the bigger number, goes in the first parentheses. 6 is smaller, so it goes in the second. Now we didn't actually solve for x yet. What we now have to do is split it up. And we do x minus 9 equals 0. X plus 6 equals 0. And now we solve. So add 9. We get x equals 9. And here we subtract 6. And we get x equals negative 6. So here is our answer for this one. Now you might see your answers written like that. You might also see your answers written in curly brackets. Both of these are correct ways of writing your answer. All right, so to get credit for today's class, you will have to complete these problems on a separate sheet of paper. Once you complete them, you are going to take a picture of your work and upload your work onto Google Classroom for the assignment. All right, everybody, have a great day.